Welcome to the 6th lecture of the 2025 spring season of the Frankfort Heritage Lecture Series and our 19th lecture in total. So thank you all for coming. My name is John Carlton and I'm the organizer of the Frankfort Heritage Week Coalition and the co-organizer of this lecture series. And speaking of, happy Frankfort Heritage Week. Our events officially kicked off this morning with the Lafayette walking tour by the Kentucky Historical Society, and we have a jam-packed week of events ahead. And I can't believe it, but we've now had 5 years of Frankfort Heritage Week. So, yes, thank you. So quickly, I want to give a big shout out to all of our incredible history, preservation, education, and tourism organizations who have contributed to building Frankfort Heritage Week over the last 5 years. The major organizations are the Kentucky Historical Society, the Kentucky Heritage Council, Liberty Hall Historic Site, Frankfort Plant Board and Cable 10, the City of Frankfort Planning Department, Architectural Review Board, the Franklin County Fiscal Court, the Franklin County Trust for Historic Preservation, the Franklin County Tourist Commission, the Kentucky Division of Historic Properties, Envision Franklin County, and we've had about 20 other organizations and many other individuals participate in specific years. So thank you to everyone and to the public for participating. Speaking of Cable 10, you can find your favorite Frankfort history programs showing all week on Cable 10. Walking tours by Russ Hatter, Frank Sauer, and Nikki Hughes. Driving tours with Richard Taylor. John Gray's Historic Frankfort Lectures from the Old Farmers Bank, and replays of the Heritage Lecture Series, and a lot more. And as always, I want to give a big thanks to Paul Sawyer Public Library for hosting us, and to my co-organizer, a hard worker back there, and one of my favorite people in Frankfort, Diane Dehoney, for everything she and her staff do for these lectures and the community. And of course, special thanks to the Frankfort Plant Board and Cable 10 for taping these lectures and for really building and hosting the digital video library of Frankfort history. And thanks to the State Journal for always giving us great additional publicity and for doing what they do to document and promote our history, especially to editor Shandavino, who has now written over 22 articles documenting the information uncovered in Frankfort's first African-American Historic Context Report. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find flyers with the full 2025 spring season of the lecture series printed in the back, and you can find the schedule on the library's website and videos of past lectures on Cable 10's YouTube channel. If you're not already but want to keep up with the lecture series, be sure to follow the library's Facebook page. And finally, back to what everyone's here for. As you probably already know, Frankfort Heritage Week 2025 is dedicated to the bicentennial of the Marquis de Lafayette's state visit to Frankfort, which took place on Saturday, May 14th, 1825, by invitation of the Kentucky legislature, while on his farewell tour of the United States as the nation's guest on personal invitation of the United States Congress. He entered Frankfort from Shelbyville on Louisville Road and came down the road that now bears his name, Lafayette Drive. A giant parade of Frankfort and Kentucky citizens were waiting for him. They took a left down Shelby Street, took another left on 2nd Street, and crossed the bridge at Bridge Street and St. Clair Street, where the Singing Bridge is today. They headed down St. Clair to the site of the old Capitol building. The second Capitol building had recently burned. They took a left on Broadway, took another left on Washington, and took another left on what was then Montgomery Street and now Main Street, and ended at Daniel Weisiger's Tavern, the current site of Whitaker Bank. What transpired before and after this event is what we're going to learn about today from our very special guest speakers. And as we near the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the America 250 celebrations next year, we're excited to honor the life and legacy of one of America's greatest Revolutionary War heroes, a visionary architect of self-government and representative democracy, a principled opponent of slavery, tyranny, autocracy, and despotism, and a principled advocate for the rule of law, equality, and human rights. Late last month, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear issued a proclamation declaring the month of May as Historic Preservation Month in the Commonwealth. He also issued a special acclamation honoring Lafayette and the bicentennial celebration we're part of today. Likewise, Frankfort Mayor Lane Wilkerson issued a proclamation declaring the month of May as Lafayette Month and May 10th through 17th as Heritage Week in Frankfort. And before we get started, I have a very special message made especially for you from Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear to help kick off the Lafayette Bicentennial Celebration and Frankfort Heritage Week 2025.
Hi everyone, it's Andy. This week we are celebrating the bicentennial of the Marquis de Lafayette state visit to Frankfort. Lafayette was not only a military hero of the American Revolution, but also an unwavering advocate for liberty and the rule of law. Nearly 50 years after the Revolution, Congress invited him to return to the United States as the guest of the nation. He toured the country, including a stop right here in Frankfort. On May 14, 1825, he was honored in the capital city with a parade, a feast, and a ball. It's important that we never forget where we came from and the people like Lafayette who helped us get to where we are. His words against injustice, tyranny, and slavery, and his words for democracy and liberty still ring true today. I want to thank all the history organizations that worked hard to put together a week of events honoring this anniversary. The Kentucky Historical Society, Liberty Hall Historic Site, Frankfort Heritage Week Coalition, the Paul Sawyer Public Library, and more. Y'all play a fundamental role in our understanding of what it means to be a Kentuckian and an American. And thanks to everyone who showed up to celebrate our heritage and history. Enjoy the events and remember, life's short. Do good things and be kind to each other.
All right, thank you. And before we get started, I want to say that today was made possible by the Paul Sawyer Public Library.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2020.
It was made possible today by Paul Sawyer Public Library, Liberty Hall Historic Site, and the Franklin County Tourist Commission contributions. Thank you so much, and please welcome Diane Dehoney to introduce today's first lecturer.
Good afternoon. As John said, my name is Diane Dehoney. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at Paul Sawyer. On behalf of everyone here, we just want to welcome you out. Thank you for celebrating Frankfort Heritage Week with us, and also for just coming back in. As you probably know, we're closed for right about a month. We reopened on Monday of this week, and we're so happy to have folks back in the library and to see all of your faces again. So thank you for all of your support. And we just appreciate you being here, so thanks so much. Before we start, if you have a cell phone on you, if you don't mind to turn that on silent or vibrate, we sure would appreciate it. It is my great honor today to introduce our first speaker. Julien is a French historian and geographer. He's the founder and president of the Lafayette Trail Incorporated, a nonprofit organization promoting a greater understanding of Lafayette's legacy both in the U.S. and France. Julien also serves as host and director of Follow the Frenchman, a YouTube-based documentary series produced by the Lafayette Trail Incorporated, and exploring the legacy of General Lafayette. It seeks to democratize access to educational materials about the inspirational life story of General Lafayette and promote a greater understanding of the Frenchman's lifelong evangelism and unalienable natural rights, constitutional liberties, and American-style republicanism. Julien holds a bachelor's degree with a double major in history and geography from the University of Toulouse in France, as well as 2 master's degrees from École Normale Supérieure de Lyon, one in human geography and the other one in digital geographies, with a focus on the integration of spatial data into web environments. Please help me to welcome to the podium today, Julien Ishay.
Thank you very much, Diane. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and it's wonderful to be spending some of the afternoon with you as we celebrate together the bicentennial of Lafayette's visit to Kentucky. It's a great place for me to be. I love visiting Kentucky. I have many friends here. It's always very special when I can come back here. Would like to thank John Carlton out there for putting this together for me. You were my main primary point of contact here, and thank you so much for making this possible. I really appreciate it. I was following. I live in Maryland. I'm French. I have a French accent, but I live in Maryland, and I was following also from the distance what was happening here with the floods and everything. And it's also, I'm going to say, it's wonderful to see that life can go back to normal, and like there are some problems here that are being resolved, like the elevator over there. But it's just good to see that life is going back little by little to normal, and that people here made sure there were as little damage as possible. So I'm just happy that this is working out this way. And so my presentation this afternoon will be focusing basically setting the stage for John's presentation a little later for the focus on Frankfurt. I will tell you a story of Lafayette. I want to tell you why the tour is important, why we are celebrating it 200 years later, and why you're all here this afternoon. So it's good to see some familiar faces. I see Richard Taylor over there that I met, gosh, it was several years ago. You haven't changed a bit, Richard. You haven't changed a bit. I saw you at Transylvania University years ago when we were working on this, and here you are, and it's good to see you. Olivia as well. Where are you, Olivia? Right over here. Olivia McKent with the Kentucky Historical Society that we've been working together for several years now. Looking forward to joining you on May the 17th. Thank you so much, Olivia, for all you do. And the story that I have to share with you today, I call this talk Bluegrass Story of American Republicanism, narrated by a French Marquis. Why a Bluegrass story? Because in the national story of the United States, I do believe there is a special twist that is Kentucky unique that I would like to emphasize today. American Republicanism as opposed to French Republicanism, these are two very different things. French Republicanism was done historically through torching our constitutional compact during the French Revolution after 1789, whereas American Republicanism is one of devotion to sacred documents, universal principles, and the life of Lafayette really mediates between these two conceptions of republicanism. And of course, the fact that he's a French Marquis, it's quite remarkable that it's a French Marquis that is the epitome of democratic equality and American republicanism. And we'll talk about all these things during this talk. So this image that you have on screen right now is what we call in French a manuscrit palimpseste. So in English, a palimpseste manuscript. Long story short, it's basically a document, a piece of parchment paper. You can see traces of the original text remaining on it, but you can also see active efforts to erase the original language on it. And I use that as a great metaphor for Lafayette's life, because the life story of Lafayette is one of preaching of democratic equality coming from the American Revolution, and that he tries to preach in France in 1789. And as the French Revolution spins out of control, this language of democratic equality is erased by Lafayette's enemies in France, but they're not able to erase it entirely. And the rest of Lafayette's life will be about regenerating his identity as a champion of freedom. And Americans will see a value in that restoration of his credibility as a champion of liberalism in Europe, because they're going to see in him a constant friend of freedom, a constant friend of America. And it's really important to stress how essential it is in Lafayette's life that his enemies tried to erase who he was, and he came back from the ashes like a phoenix, only to come back to greatness, a greatness of constancy and devotion to America. So when Lafayette is invited in 1824 by Congress, it's largely because Americans recognize in him certain features that are not very common for Europeans at the time, features of humility, features of simplicity, features of honesty. In an age of transactional politicians at the time, somebody that really believed in universal principles was kind of hard to find, especially in a continent accustomed with 1,000 years of despotism. So this is a painting made by Harry Scheffer, the Dutch artist. You can see it in the House of Representatives Gallery today in Congress. It was made in 1822, and it's on purpose depicting Lafayette as a simple man, a man of nature, a man that is surrounded by the virtues of nature, making his personality more righteous. And it's the reason why he's not being represented with the I always have a hard time with this word, ostentatoire, whatever the word is, I'm sorry, of Versailles. It's more like a simple man surrounded by the simplicity of nature, barren nature. And it's kind of this conflicting identity. Is he a French nobleman? Is he a New World Democrat? We don't really know, and it's kind of interesting how art cultivates this dichotomy. Lafayette is also the hero of Yorktown. He's the American Revolution veteran, and he's basically the epitome of this classical message of I'm decisive in battle when it matters, but then instead of capitalizing on this military achievements to become a tyrant or a king, I'm returning in a humble practice of life, a life of simplicity. That's basically the behavior of the heroes of Plutarch in ancient Greece, like General Epaminondas of the city of Thebes in the 5th or 4th century before Christ. It's also the legacy of Cincinnatus after greatness in military returns and gives away power to avoid a tyranny. And in the American national tradition, it is George Washington that does the exact same thing. After greatness during the war, we return to a life of simplicity to create freedom for everyone. That is moral character, that is Lafayette, that is Washington. And that moral character, that attitude that Lafayette has, that is very American, he will take it to France to try to free France from despotism as well. But he will have difficulties in France because the audience that he's talking to is very different than Americans. And the notion that Lafayette tried to push a political discourse of American republicanism, democratic equality in Europe is basically telling the French people, you should do like Americans. You should understand that there are universal principles that have a transcendent existence. They exist within themselves. There's nothing a monarch can do to take them away from you. And you should enshrine them in a national text that you should revere as your Bible, basically, as a national catechism. The notion is if everybody respects, reveres the Constitution as a sacred text, we can then ensure or enforce equality, absolutely. That was the idea that he took from America and that he tried to preach in Europe. Now, he did that even under Napoleon, he did that under the Bourbon Restoration. He did that with a constancy and a discipline and an intellectual rigor that was really appealing to Americans because it was so un-European and it was so American. So in 1824, when the Congress and President Monroe invite Lafayette, it is really to validate his life story of constancy. They're inviting a hero of their revolution, not necessarily 100% for selfless reasons, but America in 1824 is trying to establish a certain standing in the world to show the rest of the monarchies in Europe that a republic can also be grateful with one of its former soldiers of their revolution. And they used Lafayette because he was so young during the revolution. They use him, they invite him to use him as the receptacle of this public honors that will go on and on all over the United States. And let's be honest, if a crook tells you that you're the greatest nation on earth, you're not going to give a crap about what they're going to say, right? But if that person is a righteous man, a religious man, a person that has devoted his entire life without veering a single second, he was preaching the greatness of your country in Europe. No matter what happened to him, he goes to jail for it, he risks his life, he risks the life of his family. He does that for 25 or more so years. And if that person preaches the greatness of your principles and of your manners, you gotta pay attention to what that man is saying, because you can leverage his participation during the American Revolution, his endorsement of your revolution, 250 years later, advance the national story of the United States and validate how this country was different, that it was founded on universal principles, and that it was essential for new generations to understand those principles. So there is clearly a providential interpretation in America of Lafayette's visit, and of all the places, of all the 25 states, or 24 that he visited, plus Washington City at the time, in my opinion, the place where it is best expressed this providential nature of Lafayette's tour is at Transylvania University. It's of all places. How about that? And the reason for that is because the president of Transylvania is a reverend, and at that time, Horace Ollie is his name. He will, when Lafayette visits Kentucky on May the 16th, 1825 in Lexington, he will emphasize several features. Number one, that Lafayette's tour is a national chorus of spontaneous gratulation. These public spectacles that you see everywhere, the romantic gallantry of a French nobleman embracing American republicanism, and this notion that he's a providential envoy. What do I mean by that? For many Americans in 1824-25, the return of Lafayette, the fact that he's such a constant character across revolutions, across centuries, across cultures, across nations, the fact that he's so constant gives him a credibility as a moral arbiter. And when he comes to the US in 1825, what Horace Ollie is saying is that he is here to enforce a national devotion of Americans to the principles they laid out during their revolution, making sure that they're not veering off the right track, the track of righteousness, the track of the American Revolution. And so basically, if Lafayette tells you you're a good man, you're doing a good job, you're going to believe him because his life story validates his political discourse. And Horace Sully understood that, and basically Lafayette became this sort of arbiter or judge of the manners of Americans, and he was delivering basically a judgment. Are you faithful to the principles of the American Revolution? If yes, I'm going to tell you so, and if I tell you so, jackpot. But if you don't, I'm going to also be honest. So the fact that Lafayette gave a resounding announcement of American culture was incredibly powerful in this country because it was seen as a validation from a moral man like George Washington, a disciple of George Washington of America. Very important. So all these public parties that are going on and on and on for 13 months, they're very important, but they're important in a specific element because they are the manifestation of the gratefulness of Americans that are trying to validate Lafayette's discourse. So the more Lafayette validates the greatness of our country and our people and our manners, the more we're going to put a party for him to give him even more of a platform. And we are in Frankfort, so I used the party that went on at Weisiger's Tavern. I don't want to go on too much on that because it's going to be John's, probably a part of John's presentation, but I do want to use that as an example to stress these public spectacles that were going on, these public receptions, they served a purpose as well. They served the purpose of validating Lafayette's character and moral fortitude. So the providential origin of America, or the concepts that were institutionalized in America, you know, the $1 bill, the all-seeing eye is a manifestation of that on your little $1 bill that you see to this day. Moral character is essential. You know, Napoleon would conquer the world and basically, enslave it into despotism, whereas Washington and Lafayette, they get on their knees and they pray for humility, simplicity, for victory in war. And to me, there is a meeting between the providential concepts of these principles that are universal and transcendent, that are more like on the God-given side of things, and then what's political, what belongs to the realm of man here, mankind. And in the middle, you have public leaders with moral characters, decency, humility, simplicity, like George Washington at Valley Forge. This is what you see on screen right now that shows that the moral character motivates the soldier to be passionate, to alienate himself, to achieve what a trained European professional would not do, meaning they're here to do a job. They don't really care about American freedom. They're just going to do their job. They get paid. They move on. Job's done. Whereas an American militia soldier or Continental Army soldier, because they are so alienated by the ideals that they're fighting for, they're going to endure, or they're going to be ready to endure so much more than the European soldier because they want to be free, because they want to free themselves. Such a powerful drive to go the extra mile. And in the middle between providence and passion is moral character of people like Washington and Lafayette that are the connecting tissues between two different universes. So the way these two universes meet in Western tradition is with a constitutional republic, where this national catechism, once again, this idea that you have an institutional framework that is revered by everyone, constitutional republic, to have public order and freedom at the same time. That's the true achievement of America. Like in France, we are at our 5th iteration of a republic. Our latest one is from 1958. You've got the same republic for nearly 250 years here. And that's a true achievement to the manners of Americans, the discipline of Americans that are at the same time able to pursue change and pursue freedom while preserving public order. It's an incredible achievement, if you ask me. Even if you don't ask me, I'm going to tell you. It's an incredible achievement. So the governor of Kentucky in 1825 says exactly that people did not rebel because they wanted more money in their pocket. They rebelled for higher principles, for self-government, for freedom of legislation, equal rights, and to be free and independent. That's what drives people to risk their life. You're not going to risk your life for an extra $1 at the end of the month, but you're going to risk your life because you want to be free. And that's why Americans they've been the greatest in institutionalizing freedom. So the tour of Lafayette is 13 months. It starts in New York, all over the United States at the time. Lafayette comes around here on May the 11th until the 19th, 1825. He makes a little extra stop after Cincinnati in Maysville, Kentucky. And I don't want to go on across what he did entirely in Kentucky. I'm just going to point out the towns he visited, like Smithland, Kentucky, Louisville, Shelbyville, Frankfort, Versailles, Lexington, Georgetown, all the way up to Cincinnati, and then Maysville. These are the towns he visited. So the governor of Kentucky at the time, the notion in 1825, what's important is the country is moving west. So you no longer have 13 colonies, and the challenge for Lafayette and people like him is to make sure that these principles of the American Revolution, as the country grows to the west, the people of these new states no longer, that they do not lose an understanding of the principles that were institutionalized on the East Coast with the Revolutionary War. And in Kentucky here, Governor Deshay at the time is making very clear that he wants people to see Kentucky as a child of the West and a child of the Atlantic border, basically. The fact that it's connected with the Eastern Seashore intellectually, culturally, ideologically. People here practice the same principles in their daily life as people do in Virginia, Massachusetts. Basically creates a notion of a unified country that is united in a reception of Lafayette. So Lafayette helps to cement unity in a changing union in 1825. Very important. The visit of Lafayette in Kentucky also validates an emerging artistic tradition in the state. Matthew Harris Jewett paints Lafayette in the very simple way, just like the painting of that is at Congress here, representing once again Lafayette in a barren environment in nature to show the virtuous impact of nature on his righteous character. It's also, as I said, validating Kentucky's emerging artistic tradition by establishing a connection between an artist from here and Lafayette. Equality is very important. This is the address of the Lexington Female Academy in Lexington that will change its name to Lafayette in honor of the Frenchman. I don't know if you can read the whole thing. You probably don't. I don't want you to, actually. But you can see a center to the left. There's the Big Ward Academy. Hopefully you see it. And on the same line to the right, there is this notion of Lafayette being a gallant warrior. You always find this notion of gallantry that's captivating in American memory. Like, he's a gallant nobleman. And in fact, many people in this country recognize and remember Lafayette as the Marquis de Lafayette, even though he wanted to be called a general. To me, the fact that Americans call him Marquis to this day means that it's important for you guys to preserve in your memory of Lafayette the fact that he was a nobleman, the fact that a nobleman endorsed the American Revolution back in the 1700s. I think, to me, that's not an accident that you call him Marquis, even though he didn't want it, and he told you, don't call me Marquis. But 200 years later, here we are. So, you know, it is what it is. Now, equality as well. Lafayette visited a Masonic lodge in Lexington, the Lexington number 1. They changed location on and on. We're going to put up a marker actually there on May the 16th at their new location on Harrodsburg Road. If you guys want to come for that, it's open to the public. But basically, the whole trip of Lafayette in Kentucky is about validating American freedom, validating American exceptionalism, and validating the importance of having equality in your country. And then, of course, he plays the role of a mediator. 1824, 1825, it's a period of great division in America because you have a presidential election that is dividing the country between Andrew Jackson, William Crawford, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams. And so by the time Lafayette is in Kentucky in May, Quincy Adams won. But he's also making this job like to keep the country together. Like, even though your guy didn't win, he was still an American candidate. He was pushing for a certain interpretation of the United States, a direction that the country could have gone in, but it didn't. That doesn't mean that these people, even though they lost, that doesn't mean their view of America was wrong necessarily. But he goes to each of these homes. You know, he goes to see Andrew Jackson's house in Tennessee. He goes to see Henry Clay here, even though Clay was not here. But he went to see the wife, Lucretia, and the 2 children, to show respect for these public figures that are important in the emerging tradition of the United States, right? So this is the map of the whole itinerary that Lafayette took across Kentucky. So, you know, he was coming from New Orleans, went to St. Louis on the river, Mississippi, then went back down at the confluence with the Ohio. on the Ohio River. He got on the boat, he got up the Cumberland River to go see Jackson at the Hermitage, came back down the river, and then added some ballast on the boat in Smithland, Kentucky, and then up the Ohio River, basically up until Louisville, where he got off. And it includes a shipwreck on May the 8th into the 9th. The boat he was on sunk in the Ohio. He had to be rescued by a boat from Louisville that was bound toward the south and made a U-turn to save the nation's guests. So it's a great story. And then he gets off in Kentucky, he cuts across to Lexington, and then goes north to Cincinnati, as I pointed out. I do want to mention the story in Shelbyville. It's kind of nice because there's a new document that was found recently that I came across that mentions exactly where Lafayette was received in Shelbyville, which people there didn't know about. And when we placed the marker in Shelbyville, we also didn't know either. So now we are able to complete the story. We're going to announce that new document. We're going to show a facsimile of it in Shelbyville on the 13th of May. If you want to come for that, it's Tuesday. It's at 6 p.m. in Shelbyville at the Historical Society. But basically, when he was in Shelbyville, this is what the paper or the journal talks about, the little document I found. People venerate Lafayette here. And the word veneration is used. Like, these semantics of religiosity are important. You venerate a disciple of Washington, like very, very religious semantics, and a very American way to celebrate Lafayette that you would never see in France. Second, the highest admiration for one of their most chivalrous, is that the proper way to say that? Chivalrous? All right. Good. Chivalrous and heroic chiefs. This is a reference to the classical imagery of the warrior that is decisive when it matters. And it goes back to simplicity. That makes him a hero. That makes him like Washington. That makes him like Cincinnatus, with this chivalry of a French nobleman. The consistency, as I pointed out, that's what Americans in Shelbyville featured in their little text. They want people to know that Lafayette, in a tornado of revolution, he kept his moral compass on America, to say that no matter what happens in France, I'm going to preach the greatness of American republicanism amidst civil convulsion in his country. It's an incredible feature to have a man like that preached America in Europe for all these decades, without losing his head or even without dying. It's quite remarkable, right? And then finally, this notion that everywhere he goes, when he sees prosperity, it's a prosperity that is an evidence of the greatness of America. If you have great institutions, if you make people free, you're going to get rich. That's the idea. And I'm seeing wealth everywhere. That's Lafayette. And that's validation of the superior principles and the superior institutions of this country. So the alliance of three things that makes Lafayette's tour an incredible event. Lafayette leveraged material culture. You may have seen, if you go to KHS, you'll see they have these dresses and some handkerchiefs and scarves and memorabilia from the tour that was produced in mass. And that contributed to making the tour a national event, because people could literally kiss the face of Lafayette on a glove, or it was everywhere. And this material culture made Lafayette even more of a powerful icon. And Lafayette he understood that, and he leveraged this material culture to create moments of education, because he understood America will be only America as long as Americans understand what America is. And so his main goal was to pass on unimpaired an understanding of the American Revolution and its principles to new generations. So when he went to the Lexington Female Academy, that's an example of that. Liberal arts, this notion of liberal arts, it means you teach freedom. Across the West, Transylvania, all these universities that popped up out west, it was to make sure that Americans were educated and understood freedom, so that as these new states are chartered and they become states, people understand what they have and they can keep the Union going without having an inequality in it. So Republican education, liberal arts are vectors of equality, or equalizing the Union. Very important. And so we in the 21st century, we look at the lesson of Lafayette, we look at what made his tour super powerful, material culture, and we leverage the 21st century incarnation of material culture, historical markers. So my organization has donated over 171, I think right now, markers across 24 states, the entire geography of Lafayette's tour. We have all these markers around that you can see on our interactive maps. We have a bunch in Kentucky. Here's the one in Maysville that we have. And this is a website everyone can go visit it. And it shows you where we have the markers. And you can see all these markers that we have. It's been, several years of work out there. So we also have Follow the Frenchman. That's the show you're going to watch in a little bit. We have an episode in Kentucky. And this idea is that we want these resources to be free and accessible for folks. We don't want people that have to come here in person necessarily to be educated. We want to take the educational materials to them. If you live in Washington State or California, I want you to be able to talk about Lafayette or have access to our work. So this notion that if Lafayette in 1824 was talking about 13 states and the meaning of their revolution to the entire 24 states, I think our job today is to talk about 24 states to 50 states and territories to keep having Lafayette be a national icon and a national hero. So in concluding remarks, Lafayette being a proponent of universal human rights, equality, against abolition, in favor of female education, to enforce this notion that everybody should be equal under the law. It's very confusing because it could be a feature of somebody from the New World, a New World Democrat in the sense somebody that understands equality. That's a feature of the New World. So either it's the manners of a Democrat or it's the gallantry of a nobleman. And if you look at the documents from 1825, very often people emphasize the gallantry of a French nobleman. So it's very confusing, but at the end of the day, it is this dual identity that makes Lafayette this enduring icon that draws people 200 years later. Because unlike other French people, Lafayette did not follow orders during the American Revolution. He followed his heart. And to this day, Americans, to me, thank him for doing that. And I think that's why Lafayette is much more popular here than let's say Rochambeau or de Grasse or other French people that came here during the Revolution, because the tour cemented this identity in the minds of American people and in the hearts of the American people, because he was really in it to advance human freedom. It was a pure act of selflessness, whereas a lot of French people came here for transactional reasons or for career advancements. And Lafayette did not do that. And in my opinion, today we are in Kentucky here to honor this man because of the values he exhibited that are very American values. And I'll just leave you with this. What strikes me in Kentucky is as Kentucky was establishing itself among the other states of the American Confederation, it also made a choice, a conscious choice, to cultivate a very unique connection with France. Just a few examples. You got a Paris, Kentucky. You might have heard of this drink here that people call bourbon, right? So Le Bourbon is one of the top branches of French royalty for centuries in France. I mean, you've got a Lafayette High School in Lexington, I think, and this is so telling. To the right is the Petit Trianon in Versailles, the residence of Marie Antoinette. To the left is the home of Governor Bashir right now. It's the residence of the governor of Kentucky. Now, the design is extremely striking, the similarities, and this is not an accident. Somebody made a conscious choice to show that the governor's house, to express an affinity with France in the design of the governor's residence. In Paris, Kentucky, I mean, it doesn't get any more French than that, right? So this is this idea, when you leave today, I just want you to know, Lafayette, he really believed in America. He wanted this country to be a safe harbor for freedom. And, today we have to carry on his message, because the success of America eventually is in our own capacity, each of us here, to convince the new generations to look at the American Revolution and to understand why it made this country free from Europe. And you can very quickly, lose that if the people here do not appreciate or do not value the story of their founding. So I encourage you all to, if you have kids and grandkids, just talk to them about the American Revolution and talk to them about Lafayette. Maybe that will get them interested, or maybe not. But I think it's important. I think it's a mission that every citizen here has to make sure that the story of the founding of the nation is understood as widely as possible. And I don't know how long I've been talking. I think I'm fine. So I think I'll take some questions, if you guys have some questions, and then we'll play the video that's like 20 minutes long, so maybe it's not a bad idea if I stop here. But once again, thanks to the Sawyer Library for having us. Diane, thanks for helping with everything, and just thank you for having me, and I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute intermission real quick, so if you all want to use the restroom or whatever, and we'll come back and show the video and then allow Mr. Walker to do his presentation. All right. All right, the episode we're getting ready to watch is one of the videos that Julien has produced about Lafayette's farewell tour. And this particular episode was filmed, 2 years ago? 2 or 3 years ago. Julien came here in 2022 to install a marker at Liberty Hall in preparation for the Bicentennial. And so this is the episode on Frankfort.
Hey everyone, welcome to Frankfort, Kentucky's capital city. When the French formally joined the Americans as allies during the American Revolution in 1778, Kentuckians started adopting names of French origin for some of their counties, cities, and towns in honor of America's oldest ally, France. Fayette and Bourbon counties, Versailles, Paris, and Louisville were all named between 1778 and 1792, the year Kentucky achieved statehood. Cultivating its French connection was for Kentucky a way to challenge, if not reverse, the narrative of patriotism coming from the East Coast. People here had been dealing with the French for more than 100 years prior to the signing of the Treaty of Alliance in 1778. In 1824, the news of Lafayette's return visit to the United States resonated throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky as one last chance to physically welcome a representative of the American Revolution to the Bluegrass state. So today we're going to see what Lafayette's visit meant for Kentuckians by focusing primarily on this time here in Frankfort on May the 14th, 1825. So we've got some answers to figure out. Let us waste no time. Let us hit the trail. Let's follow the Frenchman. On November the 1st, 1824, the governor of Kentucky, Governor Joseph Deshay, circulated a message with the help of the newspapers across the Commonwealth of Kentucky about Lafayette, about the meaning of Lafayette's return visit to the US. And I think he had in mind to incentivize the state legislature to extend an invitation to Lafayette to visit Kentucky. So it took 2 weeks for the state legislature to get this processed, and by November the 17th, Lafayette had been officially invited to visit. Now, what I think is very powerful in the message that the governor wrote is the words that he used. So he opposes the New World and the Old World. Now, usually when I hear this, I always think of opposing Europe to the United States, old and young, but that's not really what he meant at all. He was opposing the 13 colonies, the old world of the United States, versus the new states that have popped out from wilderness since the American Revolution. And he was assigning Lafayette the function of uniting the geography of the country, the old 13 colonies and the new states like Kentucky. So he uses the nature like the Allegheny Mountains that separate the two parts of the United States at the time. And really, he describes the American Revolution as this patriotic force, powerful enough to unite what nature separated. So to me, it's very powerful that he assigns Lafayette this function. And I think it was very important for people here to express a connection with the older 13 colonies, like Virginia, for instance. It was very common for people here to write poems referring to Lafayette as the guest of the nation or the hero of Yorktown, to make that connection clear. And so today I do want to show you what he did when he was here. So he had come from Shelbyville when he had spent the night of May the 13th, 1825. And the next day, on May the 14th, 1825, he was finally received in Frankfort. So I'm going to show you the three sites where he went. We're going to go to the public square, the old state capitol. We're going to go to see Daniel Weisiger's home, And finally, Liberty Hall, the home of John and Margaretta Brown. John Brown is very significant in Kentucky because he introduced the bill as a U.S. representative for the statehood of Kentucky, and later he became U.S. Senator for Kentucky as well. So I do want to show you these sites now, so let's go see what there is here today. This is the site of Daniel Waziger's Tavern at the northeast corner of Ann and Main Streets. And this is actually here that when Lafayette arrived to Frankfort on May the 14th, 1825, he was welcomed here by the governor, and he responded to the governor from this specific spot. Now, why did Lafayette go here? Why was he addressed at a private home by the governor? So that caught my attention, and the reason is because in 1824, the State House had caught fire and had been severely damaged, so it was not available to welcome Lafayette. And what's interesting is Daniel Waziger, a prominent individual here in Frankfort, volunteered to help the state with the state affairs by letting them use some of his buildings, like here, the tavern. So when time came for Lafayette to be received here in Frankfort, that's here that he was received by the governor. And later on, in the evening of May the 14th, 1825, a ball also took place in honor of Lafayette, a magnificent ball that had been advertised for weeks. So it's a private home, but that individual meant a lot for Frankfort, and he came through, Mr. Waziger, to help the city and the state, frankly, to welcome Lafayette when he was here. This is a public square, so this is where Lafayette was honored with a dinner. So as you can imagine, it's a very inviting space, it's very spacious, so you could feel a lot of people here. That's where Lafayette had a dinner. And so the State House that we have here would have been in tatters at the time Lafayette was here because it had been the victim of a fire the year prior. So they had a dinner in front of an official state building that had been damaged the year prior. After the dinner was finished on the public square, Lafayette went back to Waziger's Tavern, where he was treated with a fantastic ball, and from there he paid a visit to honor Margaretta Brown at Liberty Hall, and that's where we're going next. I'm arriving at Liberty Hall. This is actually the house where Lafayette went to see Margaretta Brown. So I'm going to get together with the executive director of Liberty Hall Historic Site, Sarah Elliott, and just find out a little more about what he did here and why Liberty Hall decided to join the Lafayette Trail. Hi, how are you?
Good, come on in.
Thank you very much. Hi. What did Lafayette do when he came to Liberty Hall?
Well, Lafayette's visit to Frankfort, to Liberty Hall specifically, was a big high point in the Brown family history. So when the board found out about the trail, they wanted to participate and honor that visit by being part of the Lafayette Trail.
Can you tell us a little more about the Brown's family's connection to France?
John Brown's brother James was appointed ambassador to France and in 1824, and in that position he was able to help facilitate Lafayette's visit back to the United States in 1824 and 25. Margaretta, John's wife, wrote a letter to her mother explaining about Lafayette's visit. And evidently Lafayette did at least know of Margaretta, because when she went to the receiving line for the women who weren't going to the dinner, he took a long time to talk to her, more than he did with the other ladies. And so that indicates to me that there was some familiarity. But later on in the evening, he came to visit, and she said that he stayed about an hour and that they chatted about various things. And she was quite proud of the fact that he sought her out and spent that much time with her.
How do you relate to the fact that John's brother was the one that handed over the letter signed by President Monroe, officially invited Lafayette to return to the U.S. in 1824?
When Congress decided to invite Lafayette back to the United States, that was about the same time that James Brown was appointed ambassador. And so they asked him to submit the letter, or to hand over the letter, and because he was well respected. he was kind of the emissary that produced the invitation.
Why are there so many French names for counties, towns, and cities in the Commonwealth?
Most of the people who settled in Kentucky were veterans. The men were veterans of the American Revolution. And like almost all Americans at the time, they were very grateful for King Louis XVI and Lafayette's help during the Revolution. And so they wanted to honor them by naming places like Louisville or Fayette County or Bourbon County after the king, the Bourbon family, and Lafayette.
So Americans were enslaved in a building called Liberty Hall. How does Lafayette's abolitionist background speak to this moral conundrum? Does it add anything in particular? Is it going to help you, the staff here at Liberty Hall, to talk about slavery? The fact that you can also bring his background as an abolitionist into your interpretation?
Well, we don't know how Margaretta and John reacted to Lafayette's abolitionist thoughts. We know that Margaretta considered slavery a monster. That's what she called it, the monster slavery. But John was in favor of gradual emancipation rather than the absolute abolition of the institution. So, and the Browns are very interesting, contrary kind of family because they had sons that fought for the Union during the Civil War, even though they were slaveholders. So it's a very, it is a conundrum. We don't really understand how someone who fought for freedom, for liberty, for men at that time, how they could hold people in bondage.
The state legislature was very much aware of the historic nature of Lafayette's visit, and it sought to preserve the patriotic feelings surrounding the Frenchman's visit for the enjoyment and education of future generations. On January the 12th, 1825, the state legislature passed a bill to hire Kentucky artist Matthew Jewett, the son of Revolutionary War Jack Jewett, for the realization of a full-size painting of Lafayette, arguing that every citizen of Kentucky is eager to look at Lafayette. Furthermore, the bill commanded that the painting be placed inside Representatives Hall, which is now the old state capitol. So I do want to show you the painting. Let's take a look inside, see what it looks like today.
Hello, welcome.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Julien.
I'm Carol.
Nice to meet you. How are you? Thank you for having us.
This is the House of Representatives. It's the lower house of the Kentucky General Assembly. And of course, here on the wall, we have the painting of General Lafayette.
Carol, thank you for having us in Representatives Hall. I can see Lafayette's painting right there. Very special to be here, thank you. So my first question for you will be, why was it important for Kentuckians to the state legislature to honor Lafayette's visit with a painting?
Well, I think that the governor of Kentucky and the leaders of Kentucky at the time recognized the inspiration that he could provide to Kentuckians. The revolutionary generation of which Lafayette was a part, many of them were getting much older and beginning to pass away, and I think that they wanted to hold on to some of those early revolutionary ideals that had helped inspire the nation's founding, as well as Kentucky's founding.
Who was Matthew Jewett, the artist that painted Lafayette here?
Matthew Harris Jewett was kind of the preeminent portrait painter in Kentucky and really the whole frontier region at the time. Now, my understanding is that Jewett, when he went to Washington to try and meet Lafayette for him to sit there, unfortunately missed him. He'd already started his journey. And but Lafayette, he learned of that the Kentucky wanted to have a portrait of him, and he was amenable to that, and so left instructions. There was a portrait of Lafayette hanging in the U.S. Capitol at the time, and so Jewett worked from that portrait to begin with. And then when Lafayette was in Kentucky, he did sit for Jewett in his studio in Lexington so that he could complete the details of his face and all.
How does Kentucky today ensure that people see Lafayette?
It's part of Kentucky's curriculum that all students have to learn about Kentucky's history. And so every year we have thousands of students who come and visit this space and talk about the laws that were passed here and also the people that we see represented here, including Lafayette.
One of the themes that I like to talk about in particular is Lafayette's capacity to bring Americans together. He did that in 1824 amidst deep partisan divisions. Do you think he still has the same potential today with people talking about his legacy, what he stood for? Do you think that can contribute to unifying the country, bringing Americans together today?
So today, I think that Lafayette's legacy can really be to remind us of those, the revolutionary ideals that brought us together at the nation's founding to fight for equality, representative government, democracy. And so I think it's important that we continue to talk about him today.
Starting route to Versailles.
Oh, come on, GPS. Even I know that this is not how you pronounce this town's name. Really. When the design for the new governor's executive mansion was adopted in the early 1900s, I think Kentucky made a conscious decision to exercise its French background instead of following the tradition of American designs adopted elsewhere in the country, almost as a way to elevate itself above the rest of the states that didn't necessarily have a French connection to claim at all. King Louis XIV, when he was a child, survived an event called the Fronde that really traumatized him and had him move his executive seat from the court of Paris, basically out of the city in Versailles, right? So in the history of France, there has always been this divide between the ruler that's sent by God to France and the people that he governs over. And the design shows that. The design, the fanciness of Versailles shows that. Well, in America, there is not this divide between the people and the leader. The leader, the executive official, the top executive official of Kentucky is elected not by God, but by the people of Kentucky. So the design of the house is supposed to reflect that. And somehow in Kentucky, the design of the exterior of the governor's mansion is taken directly from the architecture of the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's estate. I think there's an interesting irony of history here. So what have we learned today? Kentucky swooned over Lafayette to honor the spirit of the American Revolution. Kentucky was able to produce its own talents like Matt Jewett to preserve its history through the arts. Lafayette's legacy is useful to the staff at Liberty Hall to talk about the lives of the Browns. And Kentucky cultivated its French connection by giving French names to some of its new localities. In fact, Kentucky did not even stop there. It continued to use French names and Lafayette's name for some of its new localities. I'll give you two examples, both of which were named after the tour of 1825, Lafayette, Kentucky, and LaGrange, Kentucky, named after Lafayette's Parisian castle of LaGrange. Even more recently, the exterior design of the governor's executive mansion was directly inspired in the early 1900s from the architecture of Marie Antoinette's Petit Trianon in Versailles in France. Speaking of Versailles, the next stop on the Lafayette Trail, once Lafayette had left Frankfort in the morning of May the 15th, 1825, was Versailles, Kentucky. That's it for us today in Frankfort. I want to thank you for following the Frenchmen to the Bluegrass state and its capital city, Frankfort. I'll see you on the trail very soon. Thank you for watching. À bientôt!
Yes. So thank you, Julien, and the Lafayette Trail for producing that wonderful video for Frankfort. On this note, before we hand it over to John Walker, I just want to let everybody know our next lecture will be Richard Taylor talking about the Sharp Beecham tragedy, November 1825, so just a few months after Lafayette's visit. That will be June 14th, 2025. And then the first lecture of the fall lecture series will be Matt Cox, researcher and collector, whose subject will be the Matthew Harris Jewett, the painter of Lafayette's portrait. And that will be Saturday, July 12th at 1 o'clock here. So, Diane.
Thank you, John. Thank you again to Julien. Our second presenter for the afternoon is John Walker. John is Curator of Collections at Liberty Hall Historic Site right down the street. After growing up in Kentucky, he spent many years traveling the United States and living abroad. He has worked as a journalist, a sailor, a website designer, and an office administrator. While at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, he studied material history preservation and Native American archives. Walker returned to Kentucky in 2024 to work at Liberty Hall. Please help me to welcome to the podium today, John Walker.
Thank you all so much. You are all troopers for sticking around for this entire lecture. And thank you so much, Julien. It's an honor to be able to present next to you. It's all the work you've done. And thank you to Paul Sawyer and thank you to John for putting on this series. As you all saw in the video, the old curator of, former curator of Liberty Hall is Sarah Elliott, who did amazing work, explained why Lafayette visited Liberty Hall. And what we have found out just in those 3 years is that there's actually more connections to Liberty Hall than anyone realized. It seemed a little off that there would be this massive celebration going on downtown Frankfort, and this international celebrity would cut out just to go 3 blocks down the street and say, I gotta go see this woman. I gotta go hang out at this mansion and take his entourage with him. And when I started at Liberty Hall Historic Site, I was told, yeah, you know, Lafayette's here and here's our wonderful plaque and we want to tell this story. And my mind went, well, what's the connection? Did he just come to drink tea? Was it just because of James Brown, the brother-in-law who was the ambassador, which was a legitimate enough reason, right? It could have just been a courtesy call. But we have discovered more thanks to research that both I have done, other folks at Liberty Hall have done, as well as people who came before us to do much needed labor in figuring out where these threads all come together. And so today I'm going to talk about these connections. What ties these two families? And we're going to work through it. I don't want to keep you too long, but I think it's absolutely fascinating. And in fact, one of the most fascinating ones at the end is just I'm over the moon about and how we're doing this. So these are 3 Browns. You have Margaretta Brown and right here. In the middle is John Brown, her husband. Those are their wedding miniatures. And there is Senator James Brown and Ambassador James Brown, his brother. And to kind of give some context, as in the video, John Brown was the first senator of Kentucky, very much the architect of what became Kentucky. And this kind of good old boy from the backcountry of Virginia that rose to prominence. And all of his brothers rose to prominence with him. And when he came to Kentucky, he had, the revolution had just ended, and he was not married. He was just kind of a young fellow, and he gets sent back to fight for our statehood, and that's a whole other story. But in 1799, he marries Margaretta, and there's two big differences here. You have a guy who's from the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and you have a young woman who's never lived outside of the city of Manhattan. And when they marry, they move to New Jersey, and then she immediately moves to Kentucky, and she had never left the big city before. And she comes to run this household while he's in the Senate. His brother, James Brown, right there, actually lived in Liberty Hall before he did. John was our representative, and James was here working as a lawyer, just like his brother. And James moved in for a while and actually became, most people don't know this, Kentucky's first Secretary of State under Isaac Shelby. And he's very prominent in helping set up what became the office of Secretary of State for our Commonwealth, even to this day. The reason most people don't know about James Brown is because he doesn't stick around. He gets appointed by Thomas Jefferson in 1803 to go be the Attorney General for the new Louisiana Purchase. And so he floats down the river, he goes to New Orleans, and he becomes one of the first senators of what would become the state of Louisiana. And if you go to Louisiana and you talk to historians there, they know all about James Brown. And we kind of only talk about him in a couple of contexts. But so you have these two very prominent brothers and a very strong-willed matriarch of this family. And when I tell you how strong-willed Margaretta was, she was reading Mary Wollstonecraft's The Rights of Women. She was reading early abolitionist literature, and she was also very, very kind of pro all liberation around. In a world where she had a voice, but she didn't actually have political rights, which I think speaks volumes. So there's three ways that people have always thought that the Browns were connected to the Marquis de Lafayette. John here was the main one. And when we first became a historic site in the 1930s, the site used to really lean in on John's story. His sons kind of embellished how much connection he had to the Marquis, and if you see the old bronze plaque, it'll say he was an aide-de-camp of the Marquis de Lafayette. This is kind of not true. And by say kind of, is it's like the position of an aide-de-camp was a very specific position in the Army. And so it'd be more truthful to say that John aided Lafayette, which kind of broadens the scope of how you define that. So John was at Princeton, and this is Nassau Hall in Princeton, when the British came through and the Battle of Princeton took place. He was in school. He was a young man. He was probably all of 17 years old. And Washington's army comes through, and they empty out the school. And when they're kind of all fleeing to go across the Delaware, John joins the student body. It's called the Student Corps. There's 100 students or so, and they're saying, Governor Witherspoon is saying, get out, get out. We can't run school right now. There's literally British troops shooting cannons at the campus. And John joins Washington's army, but for a time, and then he disappears in the record. And for a long time, the folks at Liberty Hall would say, this is when he became an aide to Lafayette. There's a problem here. Lafayette's not even in America yet. Okay? Lafayette is on a ship in the Atlantic trying to learn English to the best of his ability. And John is a student who says, I got to get back to Virginia. So he runs back to Rockbridge County, very close to Stanton, if you know where that is. That's where his family was. His father was a minister. And he kind of disappears again in the record, and then he shows up at William and Mary. So his uncle and his father sent him to go to school again, and he's there, and all of a sudden, guess what? The British are coming. So he's like, I just want to get my degree. It's at this time that the famous Virginia campaign happens. Lafayette is sent in 1781, and he's mirroring Cornwallis, and there's the famous raid to capture Thomas Jefferson, who Matthew Jewett, it's his father. So Jack Jewett's ride, right? The famous ride in the night. It's called the Paul Revere of the South, running to tell Jefferson, the British are coming to capture you and everyone in the Virginia legislature, which would have been like Patrick Henry and many of our famous founders. And so that ends up becoming like a whole other story. But John leaves William and Mary, and he goes back to his family, and he aids Lafayette's army, right? So his father and his uncle are being told, can you get us more supplies? Can you get us the more militiamen? And to all of our knowledge, this is John's connection to Lafayette. Is it possible that they met during this campaign? Absolutely. John was a man of letters. He was trained under George Wythe. He was friends with Jefferson at this time, who would become his mentor. And so it's very possible. But there's never actually a degree that they met in person. And so we have to be very conscious that there's other connections going on here, right? And so here's our lovely Virginia campaign and everything that's going on at that time. And you can only imagine what it was like to be 20 years old and very sickly, actually, and running back and forth during this war. The other problem is we don't know where John Brown was during Lafayette's visit in 1825. There is no record that he was even at Liberty Hall when he came to visit Margaretta. It's possible he was at the ceremony, but he's not listed as a speaker. So was he just hanging out at Weisinger's Tavern, drinking and doing his thing? Many of the veterans of the war were asked to speak or were recognized. John's not on that list. So it's very like, what is his connection specifically? So we have to dig deeper, like why? Why did Lafayette come to Liberty Hall? Senator James Brown, everybody. Actually, this one. And this is actually the portrait that hangs in the the French embassy, the American embassy in Paris. This portrait actually used to hang at Liberty Hall. We don't know where the original is right now. We didn't lose it. It went to a family member, so it's probably out there somewhere. But this is a copy that was done that hangs in the American embassy. So James Brown, as we talked about, first Kentucky Secretary of State, Jefferson's Attorney General, easy enough, becomes a filthy rich plantation owner. The Browns are not just enslavers here in Frankfort. This is a family network that extends from the Ohio Valley all the way down to New Orleans. One Brown brother, the middle brother, owns a plantation in Natchez. And then James ends up buying a giant plantation right outside of the city of New Orleans. He is one of the main prosecutors after one of the largest slave revolts in the United States, which was the German Coast Rebellion. And he becomes a major part of implicating the men who were trying to emancipate themselves in that. And then he also, though, writes the Civil Code with two other men for Louisiana, which to this day is the only state that doesn't use actual all common law, right? It uses some of the French law, the Roman law, and he's like a major part of that. And because of this, he had to teach himself French. He actually didn't speak French before he went to New Orleans. And he said, I think I need to learn this language. In doing so, he did really well, but he kind of doomed himself because James Monroe comes to him in 1819 and says, will you be our French ambassador? And he's like, I guess, you know. So James goes to France in 1819. And this is a time of great turmoil in American history. It's the beginning of a long decade of troubles. And the Browns are right in the middle of it. Not just the old court, new court controversy of Kentucky, but we're talking about the election, the big controversy of the election of 1824, and then further on. So he's reappointed by John Quincy Adams in 1825. It's kind of funny because a big Democratic Republican, why would John Quincy Adams reappoint him? Well, if you know anything about the election of 1824, you know about the corrupt bargain, right? So Henry Clay, who ran, gets the legislature the House of Representatives to vote for John Quincy Adams instead of Andrew Jackson. And the corrupt bargain was supposedly that the deal was made for Henry Clay to become the Secretary of State of the United States. What most people don't realize is this connection is the Browns are related to the Clays because Clay is married to Lucretia Hart. And James is married to Lucretia's sister, Nancy. And so there's all these machinations happening as a part of this story. And I'm not in any way trying to imply that it was like super evil or anything, more that it did not make the Browns very popular at the time. But also, President Adams probably had some favors to pay back, and one of them was to make sure that James Brown stayed as the minister. There's also a story of how, and you could go deeper into this, how Lafayette, the French government did not want him to leave France. And Julien can probably speak more on that. But there was a little bit of a, hey, these Americans are giving you all these monetary gifts and they're giving you all this land, and you're actually in a lot of debt, and we don't want you to leave. And James potentially went to the government and said, as this filthy rich plantation owner, I can guarantee his return. If he doesn't come back, I'll just pay off his debts, which may or may not have happened. James eventually goes on to die in Philadelphia in 1835, but is a major part of that connection. So that's great. It's like, that's a big connection. That's a good reason to visit Liberty Hall. Sure. And for anyone who's ever down in New Orleans, if you ever want to visit where the plantation was, it's actually, if you look at this map, you see New Orleans, and there's the Bonnet Carré spillway. The plantation is completely underwater now. It's actually considered one of the best preserved archaeological sites in the greater New Orleans area because they filled it in the 1930s, and everything is preserved in the mud. And they've actually gone in and done some, when they've gone into the spillway and done some digging and found some amazing artifacts from that plantation, specifically relating to the German Coast Uprising. So that's just me nerding out on geography. But if you're ever down there, go check it out. So Margaretta Brown. We don't know where John Brown was. We know that James Brown helped get the Marquis de Lafayette here. If you look at her dates of her life, 1772, she was pretty young to have actually known Lafayette in her lifetime. So why did he come to Liberty Hall? Yes, James Brown, we can always point to that. But it seems like also quite the stretch to be like, why did he just come have tea with her? And you have to look at her father. So she's the daughter of a man named Reverend John Mason. And John Mason has a fascinating life story that begins in Scotland. He becomes a Presbyterian pastor. He comes to New York City during all these schisms of the Presbyterian church. It's really hard to keep up with. And during the Revolution, being a good Scots Presbyterian, he immediately sides with the Americans. It's not a good idea if you live in New York City in 1775. It's like a royalist stronghold. And he's exiled from the city. He pretty much has to leave outright. And so he goes up into the Hudson Valley, and he joins Washington's army. There's an issue with this. He has 3 children with him, and he has his wife, and they don't want to just be in the baggage train of this army, so he sets them up in the Hudson Valley. There's another issue with this. John Mason is an enslaver. New York has not abolished slavery at this point. It doesn't get abolished. It's a gradual emancipation that happens after the war. And so John Mason owns a human being, and her name is Hannah Till. Hannah Till was born in Delaware, and she was sold to many different masters. These enslavers would take her throughout the Atlantic states, generally being used as a cook. And around 1765, she is sold to Reverend Mason. And she's living in New York City. But he joins the Continental Army as a minister. He joins the 3rd New York Continental Line. And so he goes to Washington's headquarters, and he says, I will sell you this woman if you need a headquarters cook. And Washington is kind of like, I don't know if I need another cook. And he says, please take her. So Washington makes a deal that he will buy Hannah Till, but the problem is this: Lafayette disagrees. And so the story is, according to Hannah Till, that Lafayette helped barter her freedom. And what happened was they paid her army wages so she could pay Washington. Washington paid Reverend Mason outright for her. Hannah Till is a fascinating life. She lives to be supposedly 104 years old. She sees almost every single one of Washington's battles with him. If you saw the illustration that Julien had up of Washington kneeling in prayer in the woods there at Valley Forge, she's actually the person who gave testament to that famous Valley Forge prayer. And then there was a little man peeking behind a tree. That was Mr. Potts. That's the man who had the headquarters, the house at Valley Forge. If you go to Valley Forge National Park today, she was living in that headquarters house, which is still there today. And she helped the headquarters get through that awful winter. By 1770, or by 1780, I think she had paid off the supposed debt that she owed. And she was emancipated. The good thing is she had been emancipated with her husband, Isaac Till. We don't know when they were married. And we know, and my favorite story that she told, she actually gave a deposition, she gave like an interview in her later years of her life, is that the French specie, so the French money that was promised by King Louis, was brought to the headquarters, and she woke up one morning to start baking, and she walked in, and there were just chests and chests and chests of French gold and silver like in her kitchen. And she was just like, what do I do with this? And they were like, just hold on to it and don't tell anybody it's here. When they were emancipated, Hannah and her husband Isaac and their 3 children moved to Philadelphia. They lived just outside of the city, and she worked as a house servant for the rest of her life. In 1825, when the Marquis de Lafayette visited Philadelphia, he found her, and he went to visit her. And she's 102 years old, and he asked her what, he was unsure it was her. He was a little cautious. He was like, is this woman just making up a story? And she said, where did you go when we left New Jersey? And she said, well, you know, I stayed with you for 6 months. And that's how he knew. She actually had stayed with him in Morristown, New Jersey, when Washington's army had left the state. And he was like, oh, this is Hannah Till. He found out that her estate was in arrears. She was actually in debt, and she was in very much in trouble of losing her house. And Lafayette just passed the money over and paid all of her debts. She lived another year and a half and died at the age of 104. And I can only imagine the American history that she saw. If you go to Valley Forge National Historic Site today, they're doing an amazing job interpreting her story. And so I definitely recommend it if you're ever in the greater Philadelphia area. But you can only imagine that this also had to be an important connection, is that the Lafayette, he knew her father, he knew Margaretta's father, he also knew Hannah Till, and Margaretta probably knew both, and her child definitely knew her father, but definitely knew Hannah Till as well. And I also wonder if he didn't know Margaretta in her childhood. They were both in New York at the same time. They were in the Hudson Valley. And it's very possible that he knew this little 6- and 7-year-old girl just trying to survive through this contentious time in American history. Lastly, I want to mention, and this also goes back to the great debate, and Sarah did a great job of saying this, conundrum of the Browns and enslavement, which defines that pivotal American history, the Marquis had an entourage. And so we always talk about him as though he visited Liberty Hall. He just kind of showed up and as though he was supposed to be there by himself. I personally think that he probably came with a little bit of his entourage. His son was with him, if I'm right, Georges Washington Lafayette, and as well as a few other people. And one of those people who was traveling with him at the time, I do want to say this about Hannah Till, I'm sorry. This is how we know she was bought. There is, in Washington's financial records in his library in Virginia, in 1778, we see to cash paid the Reverend John Mason for servant Hannah's wages in full. And this is playing into that whole story. But to jump back, Frances Wright. This is a Scottish woman who became friends with Lafayette, was very much not endeared by a lot of Lafayette's family, and she was one of America's first major feminists and major abolitionists, and she was in his entourage as he was traveling. What we have at Liberty Hall is something very unique, which is a first edition copy of the book that Frances Wright wrote about America, recently found. And she's so much like Margaretta, I just can't imagine they didn't at least speak for a little bit. She became a little bit more radical than Margaretta. She would go on to become a major part of the abolition movement. She started a project called the Neshoba Tract, which was essentially right outside of Memphis, Tennessee, right on the river. They set up a completely egalitarian society of white and black and native faces right there living together, to the begrudgment of everyone living around them. And the fascinating story between Frances Wright and Lafayette, you could make a whole TV show about how those two interacted together. She would eventually retire to Cincinnati, but I deep down think that there was also probably this deep need for Margaretta to talk to Frances Wright, because she herself was so against enslavement at the time, and these two had a whole lot in common. So little threads, generally speaking, and one major thread, but it's something that's been really fascinating. We have gone from just a few years ago, he visited Margaretta Brown and he wanted to have tea with her, to these major relationships and ties in to someone who today I think is only shadowed by one or two people and the number of places named after him in the United States. So that is the connection. And if you ever walk by Liberty Hall, I was thinking about this today, there's one living thing that was witness to all of this, to the visit, and that is the catalpa tree, the witchy catalpa tree, which was probably just about 20 years old when Lafayette came to visit. So if you're ever walking in front and you see the Lafayette marker and you see the catalpa tree, just remember that that tree was there when he came to knock on that door and asked to see Margaretta Brown. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Julien. And for everybody, we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. And we're only down to one microphone at the moment, so I'm going to, hello? This always happens.
Maybe zero.
Hello, there we go. All right, so does anybody have a question for either John or Julien?
Why did he come here for the first place? Why did he was interested in coming here?
In coming to Frankfort? To the United States. That's why did Lafayette want to come
To the United States?
Even as a 19-year-old, I guess. Is that correct?
No, your question is why did he come here during the war, or why did he come here during the tour?
Well, how did he just get interested in America?
There are several interpretations of that. Why was he interested in America in the first place? There were some that suggested that it was animosity toward the British, because the British had killed his father basically during the 7 Years' War, but that has lost a lot of traction lately. There's a second one that says it was because of his involvement through the Freemasonry circles, which is also losing a lot of traction because really he didn't become an active Mason until after the Revolutionary War. And the third one that I believe in personally is that the Declaration of Independence passed on and reached eventually Europe. And I believe when he read the Declaration of Independence and the language it used of universal principles, it illuminated in his heart a spark that resonated with his own story of self-determination and liberation from the shackles of French aristocracy. So to me, this language formalized by Americans across the Atlantic Ocean to reach a young boy that needed liberty and that wanted a life of adventure and glory. So it's really connected with his youth and with the language of the Declaration.
Anybody else? Mr. Moore.
Yeah, this is an oddly specific question, but do we know anything about Lafayette's English fluency, spoken fluency, especially after all the decades spent back on the continent? So I'm wondering to what extent he relied on interpreters, or to what extent even some of his discourse was conducted in French.
No, for the most part, his English is quite good. If you look at all of his letters, it's quite remarkably fluent English. There are many Americans that have commented on the quality of his English as well throughout the journey. And all the letters I've seen, it's handwritten, many of them. And there's no reason to doubt that after 40 years, his English has degraded a great deal. I don't think it did, because he connected with Americans and he kept in touch with so many Americans. I think it helped him. Now, whether his spoken English was a little different, maybe he had an even stronger accent than mine, but nobody can tell you that. I have no idea. Nobody, his accent, nobody recorded him when he was talking,
In fact, I just told Julien that my boss where I actually work had told me that she had discovered that her fourth great grandmother was in Shelbyville. She was a school teacher, and they recruited her to provide translation. And it might not have been a translation for Lafayette, but probably an auditory translation for the other people who potentially could not understand his accent. So, another question?
I wonder if you could enlighten us, Julien, in the relationship between Rousseau, who was a contemporary of Lafayette's, and Lafayette, and whether Rousseau had quite an influence on Lafayette's foundational interest in democracy and human rights.
Yes, so Rousseau is one of these writers of the Enlightenment, to me that clearly has an impact on the formation of Lafayette's mind. It's hard to say whether Lafayette's mind was fully realized or fully able to process what he was reading. Certainly it's part of his classical education in France, so I think he's equipped with a fine understanding of these writings, but in my opinion what triggers really revisiting these writings and making them even more powerful and profound in his construction as a young adult is the participation in the American Revolution, when he gets first-hand experience, and he's able to experience for himself this freedom, this notion that comes from the New World. Once he has that personal element and he goes back to Europe, and more writings are done by Condorcet and people like that about abolition, equal rights, I think it really hits a new level in his mind. So Rousseau specifically, maybe it precedes Lafayette's adventure to America, but I think it's really unlocked. The writing of Rousseau and people like that, I think, is really unlocked after Lafayette comes back from the United States, so from the American Revolution, because he has lived freedom, or at least he has experienced the meaning of it, and he's now able to read these people in Europe from a different vantage point.
I read somewhere that Lafayette depleted a lot of his fortune with our revolution and other causes. And when he came back in 1825, when he left, Quincy Adams presented him a large financial gift on behalf of the American people, because his estate at that point was not that large. Now, is that what you've found? Is that true?
John was mentioning in his presentation John Brown and the help with the finances of Lafayette. The story of the regeneration of Lafayette's finances is very important, and it has different factors, different chapters. The first one is a grant he gets from Jefferson and Congress in Louisiana, what's now Louisiana. There's like 11,520 acres. 11,000 of them were near Baton Rouge in a parish called Point Coupee Parish. The other 520 acres were to be located near New Orleans. It's a very long story, but basically that grant, by the mid-1810s, many of these lots have been sold. Lafayette's debts have been largely cleared, not entirely, but largely cleared. However, he is nowhere close to the financial situation he enjoyed before he started to pour his money into freedom. What a terrible idea. Just kidding. and it takes really until 1824, when there's another cycle of grants, that John Quincy Adams, or really before him actually, Monroe, authorizes a grant of, Congress authorizes a grant of $200,000 and a lot of acres in what's now Tallahassee, Florida, that completes the story of his regeneration of finances, to restore his status pre-revolution, pre-American and pre-French Revolution. It's a very long story, but Americans regenerated his finances, not the French. It's a fabulous story.
And if I'm not if I'm not mistaken, the law that was passed by Congress or by the Kentucky legislature to invite him here basically paid for all of his expenses while he was in Kentucky.
Yes.
Right. Anybody else?
I have a question for John.
Sure.
John, do you have any documents that you guys have found recently that could add to the story? Because I love the angle you bring with Fanny Wright, that revisit some of the reasons why he may have spent some time with Margareta. Did you find any more additional documents to suggest that, or it's looking at the entourage and like what it prompts you to think?
Yeah, I just
For television.
Yeah. There aren't, and I wish there were. It's actually quite amazing that such an event happened. Like so many things at the Brown family, and like most of our families, people didn't seem to hold it in as high of a thing until afterwards. I think Margareta felt honored, and she mentioned as such in the one letter. But for her, it was also probably just saying hi to an old friend or a friend of her father's. And the Browns being one of those gentry families were just connected to all the upper echelons. I mean, 1819, James Monroe is dining there as president. So there's definitely this sense of like, oh, of course he came to visit, And then again, the next visit was to the Todd House. And so they're doing that as well. But I wish that we had way more primary evidence for that reasoning, and unfortunately we don't. So.
Any other questions? Miss Elliott? Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Hey, Julien. I'm Sarah Elliott. I was the person in the video. I do have a question for John. What's the name of the book that Francis Wright wrote?
Yes, it's called the original book that Samuel Brown sent her, John's brother. He sent in 1821 called Voyages, Travels and Opinions on the American Country.
Okay.
And you can read that book and you get very quickly that these two women are like
I bet.
very, very similar.
Great,
Yeah.
great. And I'm really excited to see about Hannah and all the other information you had. That's cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you to Julien and John Walker and Sarah Elliott and everybody else that participated in making all of this happen. So thank you all very much for coming. And we do have freshly printed calendars for the other events for Lafayette Centennial. Thank you all.